Hello, Dr. Cap.
Hey, Yenachar, how's it going, man?
Good. Good. How are you?
Um, that's an interesting and complicated question.
Oh, really?
Uh, yeah, well, so yesterday there's been some really interesting. Basically, there was some stuff that came out. There was a court case that affected a doctor in the UK. She'd basically broken some court orders regarding. She'd basically been given some court orders not to attend certain protests against climate change, and she broke them as part of an act of conscientious objection. If you
Hmm.
break a law in the UK, you're automatically referred to the General Medical Council. Um, and basically, the General Medical Council have basically reviewed the case and decided to suspend her for about 5 months because they believe that because she's willfully broken a court order, she's brought the profession into disrepute. And it frustrates me, that decision, because less than a month ago, or just over a month ago, the GMC had issued a historic apology. They basically apologized to the UK doctors because prior to 1967, they basically would strike off any doctor who was found guilty of the crime of homosexuality. So up to 1967, homosexuality in the UK was a crime. And so if you broke that law, you'd be struck off. Now, the GMC, just over a month ago, issued an apology for that. And the basic rationale is that, yes, it was the law at the time, but actually, in a very pragmatic and ethical sense, that was the wrong thing for them to do. And now we're in a very similar situation, essentially following the exact same principles, barely over a month down the line, and they're using the exact method of using of basically threatening to strike off a doctor. This doctor will get struck off because this doctor is not going to repent for breaking the law because of their principles of conscientious objection. So this doctor has made a highly ethical decision that's not actually putting any patients at risk, that I would argue isn't actually bringing the profession into disrepute. But they're using their process, their decision making is done purely through process, not through broader ethical considerations. And they're basically repeating the same mistake they did when they, struck off doctors for being gay before 1967.
Right.
And
Sounds like it. Sounds very
that
flawed.
it's incredibly flawed and hypocritical. And to me, this is an organization that I pay money to. I pay about $500,000 a year to be registered under them, and that's a legal requirement in order for me to practice medicine. My view is if they're going to make a decision like this, then either they retract the apology they gave to the UK LGBTQI community. The right thing for the GMC is either to retract the suspension they've given this doctor, or to retract the apology they gave to doctors who were struck off before 1967. Because one of those two things,
and they shouldn't make you pay. That's
yeah,
you shouldn't make you pay into it.
no,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that are frustrating me right now, which is that I'm planning to leave the UK at the end of the year, and I have some ideas of where I'm planning to go. But I don't want to be paying into a system that is fundamentally persecuting my colleagues based on their ability to conscientiously object. I think that's especially a system that's so openly hypocritical. It just pisses me off on a whole other level. And it's funny because we're entering a discussion about we've been having discussions about privacy, governance, and cryptocurrency. And I think if you're going to have a system of governance, it shouldn't be so openly hypocritical, because it really makes you question, why do you stay in a society? What are you in a society for? What do you pay your taxes for? What do you pledge your allegiances to?
Right.
What do
And
I actually?
ultimately, why do people fight for?
Yeah.
Fight. Yep. Those are the issues.
I,
Let me bring in the other speakers. And
sorry.
we'll continue that. Dr. Kep will continue that discussion. That's an important one. Let's other speakers on. Reuben, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi,
I'm a little
Reuben.
pooped at the moment. Just finished boxing, so I'm glad.
Well, welcome, Reuben Yap and Dr. Cap. And let's see, Douglas Tuman, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
Hey,
I'm
Doug.
driving. I'm driving right now, so I might be in and out. But thank you for inviting me, guys.
Oh,
Looking
yeah.
forward to this.
Thanks for joining. So, this is the Privacy Roundtable where we discuss private cryptocurrency and other private techniques for cryptocurrency. And we have Dr. Cap from Particl, Reuben Yap from Firo, and our guest today is Douglas Tuman. We're going to talk about crypto government and private cryptocurrency. And Doug, I'd like you to introduce yourself, but before you do that, I'd like to say a little bit about what I know about you. I certainly appreciate all you've done. Um, Most of the listeners to this live and recording will know Douglas through Monero Talk. It's a great channel. It comes on YouTube. It's a podcast. It's sometimes live, sometimes recorded, right, Doug? And it covers. I mean, you have interviewed many very interesting people, and you also get into many of the important niches of cryptocurrency. And so it's fantastic to have a record of those events that you provide there. And that's probably what the listeners are most familiar with. You also have a great conference, Monerotopia, and all the other co-hosts here, Dr. Cap and Reuben and I, we were all at the one you had last year and in Mexico City, which was just beyond fantastic. I don't know how else to describe it. It's not giant and overwhelming like maybe Bitcoin Miami or Consensus is, but it's in many ways better because it's like it's a smaller community. It's just the perfect balance of talks and technical and philosophy, and you really get a sense of community going there. That's a very important event. And I was at the one before that in Miami, and that one was fantastic too. So the Doug and his wife Sunita um, like organize those, and they're really fantastic events. But it doesn't end there because you do all other kinds of things for private cryptocurrency, Monero in particular. I know you serve a great cup of coffee at events like Pork Fest, where you can tip all the way back to the original coffee bean growers in Central America with Monero. What a fantastic thing that is. And you do many other things. We first met, Doug, at Conferenco in Denver, if you remember that. And Doug and Sunita had a house party there, and there were the big Monero guys were there, but other people too. Eric Voorhees was at this party. I mean the um, the moderators of Monero Reddit were there. It was a fantastic event. I think I learned as much at Doug's house party as I learned at the conference, and the conference was great. So that was a high bar. And those are just the things I'm aware of. You do many other things. I know, Doug. You have meetups, and you go to. I mean, I don't go to all that many events. You go to many others. So I think you're the most important marketer in Monero and the most important promoter, and that makes you like among the most esteemed promoters for privacy in general. And it's an honor to have you on this spaces. So that would be my introduction. Please tell us a little more about what you're doing, Doug, and
Wow,
how things are.
I don't think I could top that introduction, man.
All right.
I greatly appreciate that. Um, we hung out at Pork Fest as well, correct? A couple times.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, 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 yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure interacting with you. You've always been a gentleman whenever we interact. Really, really enjoy it actually. Um, yeah, so I do all those things. Thanks for bringing me down memory lane. That Monero party in Denver was was epic. It was nothing
It
short of
was.
epic.
It was.
It was an after party. We rented Sunita and I rented a house in Denver to basically with the intent of throwing this after party after MoneroCon to kind of get everybody together, and it just worked out fantastically. Without going into too much detail, there may or may not have been people throwing $100 fiat bills into the fireplace, into the fire pit at the end of the night. It got a little tribal. It was fun. Yeah, in terms of things I've done, you covered a lot of them, which I greatly appreciate. Some of the other things that I'm really focused on right now is the Monero Nodo project. So very excited about that. We're building a plug and play Monero node. We're pretty much at the finish line at this point. It's a project that I've been interested in for a really long time. There were people that had taken stabs at it in years past, and then we picked up the ball and ran with it. So very excited about that. I hope it becomes a way that brings leads more people into using Monero in the most ideal way possible, running their own node, which will provide them additional privacy, and then which will also add security to the network. So Monero Nodo is a project I'm very excited about. Another project I'm working on that I'm excited about is XMR Bazaar, which intends on being a Monero-based peer-to-peer marketplace. I know there's other attempts out there, other people working on things. We thought, why not do one ourselves? It's a concept we've thought about for a long time, and it really ties into the whole goal, or the primary goal of using these technologies, right? Not just building them, but actually using them, opting out. And what do we need most to opt out? We need a way for people to connect with each other, to buy and sell goods and services directly with these cryptocurrencies, Monero in particular. So very excited about that. xmrbazaar.com. We're currently testing that right now. It's pretty much complete. What's unique about that is we figured out how to do Monero multisig. So we have a nice way for people to essentially transact trustlessly using a multisig wallet. So very excited about that. What else? I think those are the major ones right now.
And you
Monero,
have a Monerotopia coming up, right?
yeah, we
In
have a
Buenos
Monero.
Aires.
Definitely want to mention that. So we have Monerotopia coming up. We're doing it in Mexico again. There was some talk of doing
Oh,
it
you're
in
doing it
Argentina.
in Mexico.
Yeah,
Okay.
there was some talk of doing it in Argentina. We went down to Argentina in November. We went to La BitConf down there. We had an amazing time. We ended up in Formosa in Argentina, which is it's actually nowhere near Buenos Aires. But the reason we went there is because we had heard that Monero was being used organically on the ground in this little town called Ibarrete in the province of Formosa. So we had to go check it out for ourselves. I went there, and sure enough, Monero had begun to blossom in Ibarrete in Formosa. Beautiful to see. From that, actually, I guess I have to mention another thing. From that has come about the Copa Monero, a soccer tournament that's going to be taking place in this small town in Formosa in Argentina, where 12 teams are going to be competing over the next couple of months, and the winner is going to win a Monero prize. This all came out of me visiting this small town in Formosa and meeting with the young gentleman Alessandro, who's been growing Monero there. The reason Monero started to flourish there is because there's a bunch of young gentlemen that live in this town that enjoy gambling, doing soccer gambling, and they were cut off from the system that they had traditionally been using, and somehow Monero became the solution. For better or for worse, that's how they found their way to Monero, and then they started getting their local shops to accept it. And so Argentina was very much on the radar for doing Monerotopia. We were very excited about it. But we ended up pivoting it back to Mexico City for a couple of reasons. Primary reason is it's just more of a central hub for everybody, and talking to people. People were excited about Argentina, but it was far for a lot of people. I mean, unless you're living in Argentina or Brazil, it's a far destination. So moving it back to Mexico City for that reason, and the additional reason we're moving it back is because we were having trouble getting the marketplace side of it off the ground. So a big part of Monerotopia, it's not just us, it's not just like a traditional conference where people come and have talks, but there's a marketplace element to it, which we've been growing over the years. We had it in Miami a little bit. It got much larger in Mexico City, and we're trying to keep
That's all the vendors selling.
all the
Selling a variety.
vendors, all the vendors that are selling things. And so we did it in Mexico last year. It wasn't perfected. Some of the vendors were accepting Monero, some of them weren't. A lot of the conference was us trying to onboard them during the conference. But we had so much success with them that we decided we should go back there, continue to build upon that momentum. So we're working with the same marketplace in Mexico City at the same venue we did last year, and we're just going to make it bigger and better. So we, officially announcing it here. I think I mentioned it last week on Monerotopia. We're moving it back to Mexico City, so super excited about that. And we're going to have a lot of the same projects that we had involved last year, privacy tech projects beyond just Monero. The basic swap team, the Xano team. Hope to have Firo again. Reuben, I don't know. I know it's far for you. It was amazing that you made it last year.
38 hours.
Was it 30 hours?
Oh my God. I mean, at least it's a little closer than Argentina, right? Or I don't know at that point. But yeah, so and many more. So Monerotopia, it's I would describe it as obviously Monero base conference with we have the devs there talking about the tech, but then it's really more about using it and building out a circular economy outside of the traditional fiat system. And so because that's the real main focus, we're not just Monero focused. We're interested in all communities and projects that align with that passion of wanting to build an economy outside of the traditional fiat system that want to opt out. And I think Monero by far does that the best. But there are a lot of other cryptos and communities out there that are just as passionate about this concept. The Bitcoin Cash community, the Firo community, anybody who's involved.
Particl and Pivx.
Particl and Pivx. I mean, all these projects were started with that intent to build digital cash. So it's really kind of become more of a digital cash festival. So yeah, that's Monerotopia.
No, that's great. Thanks, Doug. It was a great venue last year. So that's good to hear. Well, before we get into our topic of government and private cryptocurrency, Dr. Cap or Reuben, do you have any questions for Doug?
No, actually, later on, just want to hear Douglas, because I think Douglas ran for government before, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. He ran for Congress in New York, right?
Yeah. And what I was, because recently the FISA Section 702 was renewed for another 2 years. And, I'm not American, obviously, I think that's horrible law, but just very curious, what Americans think about Section 702. Basically they allowed the FBI to continue warrantless surveillance again. And I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't really much outcry or noise, I thought that was like a really serious thing, but just a couple of people only making noise. And yeah, I mean, we can talk about that later, but I thought it was kind of relevant given we're talking about government and privacy as well. Yeah,
very relevant. And, I was horrified by it. But Douglas, what was your take on the FISA 702?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most horrifying part of it is like what Reuben said, is that most people didn't care. That's what terrifies me the most is we see the government kind of raising the temperature. Um, the frogs are getting boiled and they're not jumping out of the pot. Nobody seems to care. Not to go too far off topic, but I think we saw this a lot with COVID and a lot, kind of the tyranny that grew out of COVID, and by and far, most people in the States went along with it. Obviously, there were groups of people. I'm sure a lot of people on this, in this room, were opposed to a lot of the things the government were doing during those times. But the majority of people, the masses, just went along with it. And that was something that was very much in people's faces. I mean, people were essentially forced to wear masks. There was pressure being put on them to go get vaccinated with essentially medical technologies that weren't yet proven and properly tested. And most people just went along with it. So something even more abstract like this, FISA, where the government's doing thousands of pages of law that you'd have to read through and understand, and to really understand the implications, most people just don't care, and that's the real terrifying part. And it just shows you how easy it is for us to kind of slip further into and towards tyranny and away from what America is supposed to be all about. So that's the most terrifying part. I do think there should have been more pushback. You had a couple of people in Congress that were out there voicing the concerns, but most people just didn't care. I certainly do care for the reasons Reuben was talking about. Effectively, becomes a way for the government to spy on people, on citizens, without having to get a warrant. It's put forth as a way, as most things are that impede our rights, as a way to provide security for people, as a way to protect people from things like terrorism. But what are they losing? What are they sacrificing? What are they giving up? They're giving up their liberty. They're giving up their constitutional rights, their Fourth Amendment right. And so, yeah, it's very concerning. And it's things like this that, push me further down the cypherpunk or crypto anarchist path, realizing that this is the way we win. So to play in their game, to play in the game of politics, to try to be out there persuading the masses or persuading the politicians, unfortunately, it's just a losing battle. And I think a lot of people that got into crypto originally had realized this, and this is why they got into it. And I see that as the solution to what we need to focus on. We need to focus on building tech that the government essentially can't fuck with, tech that provides us our liberty in unstoppable digital form.
So
Yeah, one
ahead.
of the things.
Yes, Reuben,
Sorry.
please.
One of the things that I found was kind of sad. Like, they were talking like, oh yeah, it's going to protect against Chinese hackers. It's going, protect U.S. citizens. But there's history that shows that it was being used against protesters, political donors, and even a
Politicians
senators.
themselves. Yep.
Yeah. So it's just kind of goes to show that, well, sometimes all of this like talk about national security and like, I mean, this is something I guess I talked about a bit, that I used to think like the deep state was this like, this conspiracy theory bogeyman thing. But the more I look at it, the more I see the way things are being pushed through, always for like the protection of the US citizens, to protect children, all of that. You can realize it's all just smokes and mirrors, and it's just to empower all these intelligence agencies. And I actually found out that all these intelligence agencies, they were meant to have been dismantled after World War II, but for some reason or another, at first it was a huge kind of like increase in surveillance. Then the Vietnam War happened, and people were like, what the heck is all of this? And then because of 9/11, all this thing kind of came back, and now they're re-empowered, and now they're just finding new and new excuses. So we've kind of gone backward there. And yeah, sure, it's all in the US, but whatever the US does obviously has kind of repercussions. Just like the UK is also like a really big offender. I think CUP probably knows all of this, and it's just so frustrating to see that privacy and even privacy coins are being painted as a bogeyman. And we're like, hello, the bogeyman's right in front of you.
Right. And so, Dr. Cap, you were talking about the tyranny in the UK earlier. That ties right in. What's your take?
I mean, as a citizen of the UK, in order for me to legally practice medicine in the UK, I have to pay into an organization about $500,000 a year that is actively persecuting conscientious objectors. So I'm now in a position, this is the thing, fortunately, I'm financially in a position where I can basically go, screw you, fuck you guys, take my GMC number back, I'm leaving the country, fuck off and do whatever you want. That's how I feel, and that is effectively what I'm doing. Let me wind down my remaining commitments and get the fuck out. It's really interesting listening to you guys.
Where do you go, though? Where do you go?
Well, this is the thing. It's like when you guys were discussing the FISA laws, I was immediately throughout the whole thing thinking of a law passed in Australia at the end of 2019 or 2020, just kind of in the pandemic era. And basically the law, I can't remember the name of the law, but it's worse than the FISA law. It basically means that if the Australian law enforcement authorities suspect you, they just have to suspect you of being involved in drug trafficking or serious crime, then they have a legal right to hack your social media accounts, hack your email accounts, and not only to observe what you're doing on them, but to be able to add data, remove data, and modify data. So in Australian law, there is actually a law in Australia that means that law enforcement can basically fiddle around and falsify your communications records legally.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
That's
more than surveillance, modifying what you have.
Modify, add, delete, and view. And it's specified. Mm-hmm. And what's terrifying is you read the text of the law, there is no account, there's nothing in the law that says you need to keep an account of what modifications you're making, what you're viewing, what you're adding, what you're removing. There is no accountability for whatever the agents are doing. There's nothing legally in place for that. So it's horrifying. And it's really funny because in 2019, 2020, doctors in the UK have been having a shitty time over the last decade, but particularly the last few years. And it was one of those places I thought, I might consider moving there if I wanted to continue practicing. But then I saw this law. I was like, I'm out. That is, no, not to Australia. That is terrible. So if you're being principled about this, it's increasingly difficult in this world to be a citizen of anywhere. To subscribe to the physical confines of a physically defined nation state, there are increasingly fewer and fewer places where I feel you can go that genuinely have a commitment to liberty, genuinely have an ethos that believes in freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and believes in safeguarding those freedoms. And again, listening to you guys, it's not even that people don't care. A big part of the problem is most people don't even know. When I was explaining that anecdote about the doctor who's been suspended for being a conscientious objector and willfully breaking a court order at the beginning of this, I had to explain to all of my consultant colleagues, read the Public Order Act 2023, which basically criminalizes any protest in the UK that creates more than minor disruption. And I had to point out to them that you guys have all been taking part in industrial action over the last 12, 15 months, periodically, the majority of UK doctors. And the reality is, if you read the text of that law, causing more than a minor disruption to health, technically the government has the legal right to mass prosecute all the doctors in the UK who take part in industrial action, which means the General Medical Council that regulates us has the right to, is obligated to pursue cases against all of us And so if the government did do this, the GMC would be forced to mass suspend doctors. So I use this individual case of this doctor versus the profession at large to show that, you know, these laws that are being created, they're not being enforced, they're not being enforced fairly. They're not being enforced in a truly impartial manner. They're being used to persecute and to pursue political agendas. That lady was protesting climate change and, holding placards up in front of an oil rig. The indirect message out there is don't hold placards up in front of oil rigs. It tells doctors, if you want to have a conscience, if you feel protecting the public health is so great that you need to be a conscientious objector and a protester, well, you're going to risk your career, which is going to risk your finances, which is going to then risk the well-being of your family. And that is an indirect. I think it's a direct threat on the well-being of the individual, directly conducted by the state. And to me, that's an unacceptable
directly
thing.
Against protest, which is
Yeah.
is unacceptable, right?
So to me, it's like I can't. That I look around the world and I feel like it's funny that Central America has been so welcoming of cryptocurrency, particularly privacy-based cryptocurrencies. And you kind of look at the legislative frameworks around the world because you start looking, where do I go? What places are actually friendly to people who are principled? And actually, it's surprising that Central America, there are a number of Central American nations that actually are a lot more friendly than a lot of European ones on a fundamental level. But going back to what you guys were saying, I don't think it's just not caring. I think a lot of people are genuinely ignorant. And I think the ignorance is because the manner in which news and information related to legislative changes, the manner in which that's disseminated in the country, in the UK at least, is incredibly poor. You might see the odd headline, but you don't see any. It's not like every day where, if a politician gets done in for some random scandal involving an affair or giving money to, some drug dealer or whatever, they'll get, or some tax offense, some gossipy thing. That same person will have this headlines for weeks on end. The media will publish those headlines, but the media and journalism, they're not, for whatever reason, they're not pushing this sort of stuff into the public domain. And I can speculate as to why that is, but at the end of the day, there is a genuine ignorance, and I think, Douglas, you're right. It does push me more towards pursuing a decentralized nation state. And when you were saying, you're running, you're launching XMR Bazaar, I feel happiness because it reminds me of the conversation we last had, where it's like you've got a decentralized store of value, then your decentralized economy, and then you can start having decentralized governance. So, as much as I feel frustrated with the world right now, I do feel that collectively we're building something that is genuinely better than what we have now. So that's what I got to say, and I said a lot.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, on that subject, so we're there's this great debate, right? Do we engage with the government and politics to try to push our agenda, as many do, right? There's Coin Center and others out there doing that. Or do we take, as Doug mentioned, the crypto punk ideology, where we build something they can't stop anyway? That's kind of the debate, right? And so Doug, it sounds like you're leaning more towards the build something they can't stop anyway.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I ran for Congress in 2020, right? So,
how did that leave you, by the way? What was your feeling after that? Did you think more highly of it or
no,
less of the
I mean
process?
that makes me more of a cypherpunk than ever before. I'd
Okay.
say,
Well,
you really see how the sausage gets made, and I didn't even get to the point where I got elected, but you start to see the elements that you're dealing with, the powers that are out there that want to control you. When they see you running for office, all the these lobbyists and these groups that want to influence you, and control you without getting into too much detail, and then the parties themselves and the party system. the whole thing is just so deeply corrupt and controlled. We had a young gentleman that I'm sure you guys heard about it, that's set himself on fire
Right in front of the Trump
in front of the
trial.
in front of the Trump trial, and he's actually, I didn't realize it at first, he's from my hometown. He's from my community.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like very much so. Like went to
And he mentioned cryptocurrency in his
yeah, he was actually
in his
anti. He was
documents.
actually anti-crypto. He sees
Mm-hmm.
crypto as who knows how well he understood it, but he sees crypto as yet another means of control, which I thought was unfortunate. It's like, wow, I wish I would have bumped into this kid at some point. Very sad to see, but his overarching point was that that whoever the they are working against us, and it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, but the powers that be are trying to divide and conquer. And I do very much agree with that sentiment, that it's not Republicans versus Democrat, it's not left versus right, it's the powers that be versus the people. And they use things like politics to divide and conquer people, and it's really
In the
sad to
media.
see. I mean, we all experience it. We experience it online. I'm sure we all here even experience it at our own family gatherings, where you could be talking to a close family member who may deeply disagree with you about a political issue. I mean, it's gone so deep where they're essentially splitting families apart. So yeah, to get back to the original question, I do think we need to come at it from both angles. Yeah, I ran for Congress, and I saw how the sausage gets made, but ultimately I do think it's worth working at it from both angles. It's worth working at it from the political side. Do I think you're going to achieve much there? Unfortunately not, but I don't think we should leave that. I don't think we shouldn't fight on that front as well. We should fight on that front, engage with them there, but obviously put most of our efforts and energy towards opting out and building our own systems outside of theirs. But I do think it makes sense for people to work on both ends, and people have different skill sets. So there are people in this ecosystem who maybe do have the skills to get politically involved, and I wouldn't tell them they shouldn't. I think they should, as long as they have, they should stay strong to their principles and realize what they're up against. And I do think what can come out of that mostly is just communication. At the end of the day, this is an information war, right? We're building the tech
Right.
already exists. We've already built the tools that we need to opt out and win. And now it's just an information war where we need to get the information out to the people, and they realize that these tools exist, and it's just a choice in their mind. It's as simple as enough people choosing to go this direction. And so part of that is obviously politics. So we want to use those means as well. We want people out there in the mainstream, having these arguments out in public. Are they gonna change the world? Are they gonna become elected president and change the world overnight? Probably not, because the system is so deeply controlled, by the powers that hold on to it. But they might, along the way, get information out to the masses and push them towards these tools that we're building. So I think it's worthy to work it on both ends for sure.
I think that makes sense. That's a good take. Reuben, what do you think about the working with the government versus building something they can't stop? Debate. Let's see, is Reuben on?
I think Reuben is on, but he's requesting, so he may have been cut. If we can just bring him back on.
Yeah, let me just bring him in here. Let's see.
In fact, let me get him back. But yeah, I mean, Doug, I basically agree with that. At the end of the day, governments control. Oh, hey, Reuben.
Sorry, what was the question?
So we were discussing, the debate of do you engage with the government and with politics to make change, or do you take the CryptoPunk path of
No,
building
I,
something they can't
I
stop anyway?
I agree with Douglas that it has to be, several prong, right? You cannot say, let's just screw regulation. Then you basically, once you give up that fight, even though if it's a losing fight, there has to be a kind of like a counterbalance, especially against the narrative. Because otherwise, most people, especially in Asian countries, because I come from Asia, right? A lot of people put a lot of trust in the government, right? And even you see, like even like many places, they put trust into authorities, into institutions, like even like I trust what Binance says, right? So I think it's really important to even try to engage in that way and also build that like alternate system because it goes hand in hand. If you build this alternate system, but no one's going to like use it, it's kind of like, well, okay, we have these systems, but there are not enough people who buy in, right? And even today, like I do think that privacy crypto, even when I meet people who have been in crypto for a long time, they're like, hey, Reuben, you're building like this money laundering thing, and this is a very pervasive very pervasive thing. And when I explain, they just think I'm making excuses and stuff like that. And you take a look at like the recent news about like Railgun, like the way that the media has portrayed it, it's like, oh yeah, Vitalik Buterin promotes the use of the mixer that North Korea likes to use too. That's all like freaking fear mongering. Which, by the way, Vitalik's privacy pool idea is horrible. But I'm just saying that, like there is this concerted effort, and there has to be some sort of kickback. And it may seem like a losing battle, but there has to be that voice there because you want to be there that when something shit happens, then that voice can start like kicking back, right? If we just say, oh,
Right.
we're going to build this alternate system, and it kind of becomes like a bit of a circle jerk, right? So yeah, that's kind of like my take on things, that it has to be in both ways. And it's really kind of sad that, yeah, like, this is even happening with privacy crypto now, right? Like, there's no evidence that significant criminal activity is happening on privacy crypto, and yet we're seeing this huge crackdown everywhere that were being used in, in terrorist funding. But something that Douglas talked about, which was kind of interesting, because he was saying like, oh, that guy that set himself on fire said that, oh, yeah, crypto is a means of control. And I actually although we know that crypto was meant to be this thing, increasingly it has become a tool of control. Right? Take a look at all the projects that are in the top 100 today. How many of them are decentralized? How many of them are not run by VCs? How many of them are actually building something useful? And all this distraction of memes and all of that is fun and games, but it distracts them from what crypto is supposed to be about, right? Which is supposed to be alternate. I mean, like, Bitcoin is like a total shit show, right? Like, oh yeah, let's lose lightning, and let's cap this usage. Let's put more custodians, put more watchtowers and all of that. And it's just so horrible, right? And everything is, oh, let's build another L2. It's centralized L2s. Most of them are centralized L2s. There's maybe only one or two decentralized L2s.
That's
So,
on Ethereum.
yeah, but I'm saying that, like, how do you see crypto as a freedom thing there? No, again, we are being played, right? And that's why it's really sad. Like, crypto, I believe, actually has become a tool of control because we have let it become that, right? And Bitcoin is the one that's kind of leading the way. Like, where do you see the freedom there? There's no intellectual honesty when it comes to dealing with Bitcoin maxis, right? They say, oh yeah, no problems. We're not meant to be cash. We're meant to be a settlement layer. There's no problems
Store
with
of
not having
value.
privacy and all of that. Oh, Lightning is so great, even though it's like a fucking failure for how many years. It really pisses me off. And then they're like, oh, let's create a fee market. Then when actually people start putting ordinals and all of that, they're like, oh no, don't use it for that. I'm like, come on, Anyway, I should end my rant.
Well, it's certainly the case that privacy is an important element of not letting the system exert control over individuals, right? If we have privacy in what we're doing, what where does the control come from, right? It's a very important element, and that's really why we're here. Now, Dr. Cap, please continue your thought from earlier.
So I agree with both of you in the sense that, yeah, we do need to engage with governments, with institutions, and with organizations to get our message across. The difficulty comes when the behavior and actions of those institutions are so fundamentally repulsive, where from a personal point of view, it's like, to me, like using the GMC as an example, their actions I find so repulsive that I don't want to engage with them. And that's the hardest thing. There is an argument for me to go, using that example again, I should join the GMC, or I should become a member of parliament, and I should work my way up the ranks to get to a level of sufficient authority to be able to make change from within. And I really do see the power of that argument. But the flip side to that is, oftentimes in these established institutions, if you're trying to work from within to progress things, you kind of have to comply with the system itself in order to progress. So, you know, your ideology, you must adopt the ideology of the party. You must adopt the ideology and actions of the institution in order sufficiently to make progress within it. So working
it feels dirty to you to engage with them.
You ultimately have to compromise who you are. And I do think it is important to find compromises sometimes, but I think the sorts of compromises these institutions are making are forcing you to make, I feel increasingly are going too far. And that creates a real point of friction. Now, engaging with institutions and organizations as an external and independent entity or authority, that's very different, because you can essentially work on your own terms. If you're a private individual engaging with a public institution, you can pretty much set that course of dialogue on terms that, you know, are much more in compliance with what you feel and what you think is right. But again, because you're an outsider and not an insider, you need to create, in order to force meaningful change or to precipitate meaningful change, you need to have the ability to build enough external influence and enough external pressure to force an internal review. This is actually, you know, I've worked in the NHS, the National Health Service, for a decade. It's a large bureaucratic institution, and oftentimes, you know, it only changes when things go horribly wrong, or it's only forced to introspect, you know, at an organizational level. This is my experience of it. And the change only happens when things go so horribly wrong that the established entrenched hierarchy has no choice but to cave, as it were. So that's kind of my first thought. I think the second thing, and it feeds back into what Reuben said, is a lot of our established entities and organizations, there is a lot of trust inherent to them. And because society, it's a construct that's built by social consensus, trust consensus. But just because we have social consensus and trust consensus doesn't mean we're knowledgeable about those institutions that we put our trust into. It doesn't mean that we understand how they work. It doesn't mean that they are incorruptible. And I think it's this idea that most people, you know, you're born as a child. I think that all of us in this room, I suspect we're in very nice circumstances where we're in a position where we have the time and space to talk about this stuff. But I think frequently of patients that I treat and people that I meet, you know, I see plenty of people, you know, the good base example is works 2 jobs full time just to pay the bills, just to feed the family effectively. You know, that's an increasingly common scenario, even amongst my soon to be former professional class. You know,
right. All that amount, despite massive increases in productivity, right? So there's no excuse for it.
If you look for inflation-adjusted GDP year on year in the UK, it's pretty much gone up every single year with the exception of the pandemic, and that applies globally as well. But wealth inequality is completely changed. So, you know, right. The rich are getting richer, and 99% percent is now becoming the 99.9%, and the middle class, in the UK, that's being eradicated as a consequence. And on a very material level, my colleagues are feeling that. We are having to work harder for less. And we are seeing a decline in standards of living, a decline. The best barometer for me is, I have a nice long commute to work every day. The sheer number of potholes I've seen in the last year has gone up exponentially. It's things like noticing the lights switching off on highways and more potholes appearing. It's things like, that's a really easy thing if you have a cushy existence, which I'm fortunate enough to have or just seeing an increase in the amount of litter, an increase in the amount of general sort of social unrest, disorderly behavior. Even where I live, it feels you can physically see things changing. And that's the thing, when the majority of your population are too exhausted to think, then they simply don't have the time, the energy, the reserve to engage. So these systems that are actively failing the majority of people, I think the duty of a state is to protect and safeguard its citizens, and I think that needs to be a consensual contract. But again, you're born into a state, so it's not like there's an element of this consent which is very much out of your control up to a certain point. But the thing is, can you get to that point where you're sufficiently educated and sufficiently resourced to be able to have meaningful, informed consent? I didn't even really understand the impact of 2% per year inflation until, in terms of real terms pay erosion. It really didn't occur to me just how much that the compounding effect of that, over simply a decade. It really didn't occur to me until a year ago. And that
it's a lot of money. It's
money.
really worse than the 2% because it's 2% on top of what's a natural deflationary force of increased productivity. So it's more than 2%. It's more like 5%.
So, when you look at this, my colleagues are now realizing, we've had real terms pay cuts of 30% over a decade on top of raising taxes, declining living standards. But we're all too exhausted to engage because unfortunately we just don't have that. And this is the thing, where do people who have got the resources and the time to engage, how do we go about it? How do we go about it effectively? And I think technology does trump all in the end. We have to work towards the technology because the technology ultimately forces the solution. Anyway, if you make the technology convenient enough, everyone will adopt it. And then existing institutions, and the role of any institution is fundamentally to protect itself. It's self-preservation that exists on an individual level, an organizational level, an institutional level, a state level. All of these bodies look to preserve themselves, and that means maintaining their existing structure. That's a natural impulse tendency. And that's what we're seeing with the way the world is going, is that in the face of monumental changes in terms of global instability, states are contracting and trying to ossify against a need to change at a fundamental level. And here we are having this discussion about how we bring that change about in a way that people can understand. Sorry,
maybe
I could go on.
No, that's good. Maybe we're headed towards the same thing at a state level that you mentioned earlier causes change in like the medical organization, which is you need like big problems. It needs to be forced. One thing I would add to that, my take, if you feel like you're working with somebody, it feels dirty and you're having to compromise your principles, that's probably a sign that it's time to fight instead of cooperate, right? You don't want to sacrifice your principles. One other take I would add is you mentioned technology. I think technology needs to be like channeled in the right way. What we're experiencing right now is technology being used as a force of centralization towards governments. I mean, all these things we're talking about, surveillance online, capturing all this data, it's enabled by technology. And that technology is new for humanity, and it's a centralizing force. I mean, we've had problems with centralization, going all the way back, the Cyrus the Great and the first emperor of China, right? That was hundreds of years into BC, and they were centralizing power. even then, but they always had to rely on people to do it. They got their power from other people. And with AI and with technology today, individuals are able to gain power without the same level of reliance on other people. And it's a danger. And I think that private cryptocurrency is a counter to that. And it's important that we push it now as a decentralizing force to counter that centralizing force of technology. But let's see, we're coming up on the end of the hour. Let me see. Do any of our listeners have questions for Dr. Cap or Reuben or Doug, our guest? Let me see. I don't see any questions. So let's end with one. We have a few minutes with one thing that came up earlier, which is which countries are have the best government leaning towards cryptocurrency, and it came up that maybe the Americas, Central, South America are doing better than Europe. It does seem like there's a lot of bad news coming out of Europe, but maybe Spain. I hear good things about Spain. I don't know. What is your take? And maybe starting with you, Dr. Cap, on what, just quickly, which countries are looking the best right now? Which governments?
From a regulatory and taxation point of view, I would say Panama looks the best. There is no capital gains conversion tax for cryptocurrencies in Panama. You can basically use it as a currency in the sense they have a policy of currency neutrality. Lovely, healthy economy, among the happiest people on the earth if you look at those metrics. And they are actively encouraging people. They are actively encouraging people with wealth derived from cryptocurrency to come and utilize it in that nation. So that's kind of my number one. If I would have said up to a certain point, I would have also said Germany. Again, from a taxation point of view, Germany is ideal, but from a legislative point of view, and because of the recent EU framework, I don't think it's a place to go if you are into privacy-based cryptocurrencies. I think the whole EU needs to be avoided if you look at the interpretation of that framework.
They do like cash in Germany, though, right?
They like cash, but it's the recent the EU framework that they released. It really does put restrictions on cash spending, as in cash limits. So it's kind of illegal. It's effectively illegal. They want it to be illegal to spend more than a certain amount of cash in a single transaction. I can't remember the limit. I think it's 10k euro. Right. It's not huge. And when that's inflation adjusted over the next decade, it's going to be negligible. It's effectively a time limit on cash in society. The UK is crypto friendly. I mean, they gesture an overture towards wanting to be crypto friendly. I don't think they've really adopted. They haven't really adopted. Haven't adopted any sort of framework so strongly against privacy-based cryptocurrencies as of yet. And so I would say there are a couple of other Central American countries that kind of come to mind, but I'll pass it over to my colleagues on this one.
Okay, Reuben, what's your take?
Actually, if you don't mind, I just got to jump in real quick because I have a hard stop here at 10 o'clock because I got to jump into to something.
Okay, yes. So we want to hear your take, Doug.
I honestly, my take, I could go in and try to describe some of the different jurisdictions and whatnot, and where I think the best one may ideally be. But just my personal take is, born and raised in the United States, in New York, and unfortunately, I'm stuck here, guys. I mean, my roots go deep. I have family here, lots of family here. And once again, that was part of the reason why I ran for Congress, because I don't see myself being able to completely opt out of the state of the US. So I'm probably here for the long term. So my goal is to bring America back to what I believe it stands for and help push it in that direction. opt out virtually, use cryptocurrency, use Monero, completely opt out as much as I can in that regard. And I think I've done that to to a pretty good ability and continuing to do that. And hope that we kind of gain mainstream adoption and we shift America back to the values it's supposed to be. I'm hoping it doesn't end in some kind of Supreme Court case of the U.S. government trying to ban Monero. So I'm fighting the good fight here out in public and 100% am not giving up. So I'm planting my flag here in Monerica. Um, and it's true, right? And one life to
Right.
live. Let
Right.
for those who have the ability to go jurisdiction hunting, God bless you. I'm jealous. But yeah, I'm looking to turn America into Monerica. And I just want to say, thank you for having me on. Apologies, I have to leave in a rush. And I would like to just, say Monerotopia one last time. Monerotopia.com. Please do check it out. Uh, it is an amazing conference for
It
mostly
is.
because of the people that are involved in it. It's like this space, but in the real world, everybody just hanging out, talking about these ideas, and
Great idea discussions.
it's really important to get together in the physical, face to face with other people that believe in these concepts, because it takes a lot of energy and will to opt out and do these things, and when you're there standing face to face with somebody else who believes in the same things you do and believes in these ideas, it really re-energizes you and gives you the strength you need to forge on. So highly recommend people check that out, and we keep it as affordable as possible. And if anybody can't afford to go, we'll give you a ticket for free. It's just about getting people to come down and communicate together and try to figure out how we could all opt out. Cheers, guys.
Yeah.
Greatly appreciate you having me.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for joining.
Thank
We all
you.
second that.
Thank you,
Doug.
Reuben. Thank you, Dr. Kapil.
Okay, so Reuben, what's your take on? And I have to say, I like Doug's take as an American too. I think it's also good to keep fighting. So
I actually want the decentralized nation state to be called the United States of Monerica now. I feel like that just does it for me.
That was good, wasn't it? That was very good. Yeah. So Reuben, what's your take on this? Where are the countries that are good?
I don't know. I'm very biased because I even though I've been subject to a lot of government actions, but I'm quite happy where I am because I'm kind of in the jungle in Borneo. And
jungle sounds good.
Yeah. I mean,
and you've done. We really shouldn't miss out on what Firo did with elections too, because that ties into the government theme as well. Please, if you would touch on that, I wanted to. Sure.
I know, but we're at 10 o'clock, right? And then
we'll go over by a couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes, please. How did that go?
Well, you mean dealing with the government and Firo?
Yeah.
I mean, this is something I'm proud of and also not proud of. The way to put it, right? On the one hand, we gave a way for privacy cryptocurrencies that are willing to implement this new type of exchange address to remain listed on exchanges, right? And previously there was no path. It was just unless you guys remove all your privacy, it's going to be a delisting, right? Which is also going to be a really bad for privacy because it's you're delegitimizing us, you are making us some sort of pariah. While on the other hand, obviously transparent addresses does involve, I would say, kind of a loss of privacy in the sense that you are revealing to the world how much is entering into the exchange. And generally, the exchange will use a static, transparent address that, once you know that this person, this address belongs to Reuben, you can tell whenever I'm sending it to an exchange. But it does not affect P2P type of transfers, right? So that's kind of a trade-off. And I mean, on the bright side, we managed to, you guys adopting it, Zcash is also adopting it. I think Dash has been in talks of potentially adopting it as well, because they're also interested in the lattice spark technology. So I do think that it remains to be seen how successful it is. I am quite positive, at least in the short to mid-term, it's going to still remain all these exchange listings while we build better decentralized exchanges like basic swap, Sarah, and all of this other stuff as well. Because I really think that we need that time. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's like a kind of a mixed bag. I do feel really proud that using my legal background, I was managed to find a way that was acceptable, and I feel that one thing that was really cool was that the people at Binance, the lawyers at Binance, basically said, yeah, this satisfies MiCA, and apparently, according to some, I'm not going to name them, but some other people also talking to other exchanges in Europe, they say that, yeah, exchange addresses will also probably, other exchanges also agree that exchange addresses would solve their MiCA concerns. So this is obviously, for now, right? And we, at the moment, I think it remains to be seen how this develops. And of course, I respect the stance that some other, coins take, like Monero, like, oh yeah, go ahead and delist this and all of that. But I guess like my kind of like worry is that, yeah, of course, Monero is like, the number one cryptocurrency in privacy cryptocurrency at the moment. But if it loses all its kind of centralized exchange listings, which is starting to look quite likely, like even Dr. Cup say, oh yeah, UK is great, but no, actually Kraken delisted Monero from UK and is not allowing privacy crypto as far as I know, right?
Okay, I did not realize it was that the UK had delisted Monero. So okay, that then fair enough, retraction is due. I think the UK is friendly. I guess most of the world is increasingly friendly towards public blockchains, and it's easy to see why public blockchains are in the top 100, because you can track them, you can trace them, you can control them. But to actually kind of fight the corner for privacy-based blockchains, to me it all comes down to separation of money and state, and privacy-enabled blockchains allow that. When Bitcoin was originally promoted in 2011 and 12, I was around when Bitcoin was being promoted. I was observing in 11 and 12 when it was being promoted as a untraceable private cryptocurrency. As an untraceable private currency. You buy and sell stuff with Bitcoin, no one can see what you're doing, and that's before chain analysis actually became a thing. And it's really funny to see how the fact that Bitcoin is not actually a private cryptocurrency, how the fact that it's public and traceable has actually in some ways helped to facilitate its growth rapidly, I would argue, certainly in terms of gaining liquidity. And I think the narrative around Bitcoin has changed every 2-3 years. Every 3 years I look at Bitcoin, it's a different narrative that's used to push that project. And it's funny that last one you did, Firo, with friends, that the lady you were interviewing, what do I know about Bitcoin? Oh, the numbers go up. And I just laughed because it's true. This is all about, systems that play into people's psychology and their needs. And unfortunately, I think you can design a system that plays into a person's psychology and their needs, but that system is not necessarily going to benefit them. In fact, it might exploit them and harm them. And this is something that most people don't understand because they don't get to a position in their life where they are able to. And I think that's the key point of despair. But the key point of optimism for me is that, all of us with our different philosophies on privacy and how it should be implemented have a common degree of understanding and a common degree of ideology, that whilst we can pursue our separate solutions, we can still come together and talk and be willing to engage in open discussion and open fora. I think, to me, I have a whole load of respect to Doug, I wish he was still here to tell him this, for kind of staying the course and staying there. For me right now, things have changed to the point where they feel overwhelming for me. And I do have some familial ties here, not probably nowhere near as much as Doug's, but I think just being able to get out here and talk and have an audience with you guys and have these things recorded, at least for posterity at the minimum, creates that record on public to say these discussions are happening, and it creates that bedrock of information for people to listen to. The next thing is getting that information out there. So I think dissemination is the big thing. I don't think the ideology now is very mature, but the dissemination of that ideology is what's currently immature and what we need to collectively work on.
I think that's a good point. We do need to get the word out more. And I absolutely, that's key. Well, I think, and maybe that can be a discussion for a future month. I think we've had a very good discussion here, and we can wind it up. Any final comments?
I just wanted to add that, like one of the things that's like kind of like makes me rather concerned as someone that, is in the privacy space is the rise of, I mean, like we say, like, yeah, we're going to embrace all these centralized exchange delistings, and we are going to move to all these decentralized exchanges, right? And of course, like, basic swap, order book base, and a lot of others, order book base, I guess, provides a lot more privacy. But when it comes to, like, for example, like in Monero, one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is Sarai. And I really love what Sarai is doing. Kaya Banev is like, really one of the best people that's pushing Monero and like its adoption forward. But everything in Sarai is going to be transparent, and we have been doing research on how to do kind of like privacy preserving AMMs, and they are not easy. It is possible, but there are certain things that still need to be transparent. But if we are kind of like putting all our hopes on these decentralized exchanges, we have to be quite careful, because yeah, look, Luke is a US citizen, there's going to be an associated token with it, and everything's also going to be transparent, right? So how is that actually better than a centralized exchange? Because, now with a centralized exchange, only the centralized exchange and the regulators that it discloses to knows what's happening within it, right? But
right, that's right.
With a decentralized exchange that is totally transparent, the whole world can see that, right? So I think there are pros and cons, but I think it's just like, don't like, go and force Messiah. This is going to solve everything. It will solve certain things, right? And I'm very happy that this is going down that direction. But don't be too cheering and say, yeah, we have the solution. Always you're going to be, another thing like Lightning, right? Like, yeah, Lightning is going to solve everything. And it's clear that it doesn't. So I think that's just my caution there for people who are advocating let's just delist on all centralized exchange at the moment, because I think we are lacking privacy preserving DEXs that are AMM based. I think Basic Swap does a good job with the privacy there, and Renegade as well. So yeah, there are good pros and cons, but yeah, I guess I'll stop there.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good. Well, that's a good place to stop it. Dr. Cap, Reuben, thank you very much for joining, and thanks to Doug too as our guest. Good discussion. We'll end it there.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.